February 14, 1943, Sidi Bouzid, Tunisia. They told us in training that the sound of a bullet passing over your head was a sharp crack. They never told you about the sound it makes when it hits the man next to you. It's a soft, wet thud, a sound you feel more than you hear. I was 19 years old, and I had been in combat for less than an hour. My world was a 10-foot wide foxhole that smelled of sweat, fear, and hot metal. Out there, across the sand, they were coming. The Panzers. They weren't the gray ghosts from the newsreels. They were real, smoke-belching iron monsters, and they were getting closer. I watched one of our anti-tank guns take a direct hit and simply vanish in a ball of fire. We were alone. We were going to die. Then I felt a hand grab my shoulder. It was Sergeant Davies, his face covered in grime. He yelled over the noise, his voice raw. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the metal stovepipe lying in the dirt between me and my buddy Leo. "Miller, get on the damn bazooka now." This was the reality for thousands of American soldiers in early 1943. A brutal and terrifying introduction to the realities of modern warfare. For years, one image, above all others, had symbolized the seemingly unstoppable power of the German war machine, the Panzer. These steel beasts, acting as the armored spearhead of the Blitzkrieg, had crushed Poland in weeks, stormed through France in a matter of days, and pushed deep into the vast frozen expanse of the Soviet Union. To the common infantry soldier, the sight of a German Panzer emerging from the smoke of the battlefield was a vision of certain death. Their armor was thick. Their cannons were powerful, and they moved with a speed and tactical coordination that Allied forces simply could not match. By 1942, the myth of the invincible Panzer was at its peak. In the scorching deserts of North Africa, Erwin Rommel's legendary Afrika Korps, spearheaded by the formidable Panzer III and Panzer IV tanks, had driven the British Commonwealth forces back to the very gates of Egypt. The infantryman's primary anti-tank weapon at the time, the boy's anti-tank rifle, was a heavy, unwieldy weapon from a previous era. It fired a heavy, solid slug of metal, but against the thick, sloped armor of a 1942 Panzer, the bullets would simply spark and ricochet off the steel hide of the advancing behemoths, a futile and often suicidal gesture against a metal god. The balance of power on the battlefield was brutally clear. Tanks ruled and infantry died. In November 1942, a new and untested army entered this unforgiving theater of war, the Americans. As part of Operation Torch, tens of thousands of U.S. soldiers landed in Morocco and Algeria, ready to fight the Germans for the first time. They were confident, well-equipped, and thoroughly unblooded. The veteran German tankers of the 10th Panzer Division, men who had been hardened by campaigns in Poland, France, and the endless plains of Russia, looked upon these new arrivals with a mixture of professional curiosity and contempt. To them, the Americans were boys fresh off the boat, about to learn the bloody realities of modern warfare. The first major clash came in February 1943 at the Battle of Kasserine Pass. It was an unmitigated disaster for the Americans. Their tactics were poor, their command was indecisive, and their existing anti-tank weapons proved utterly useless against the Panzers. The Germans, led by the tactical genius of Rommel, punched a massive hole in the American lines, inflicting heavy casualties and a humiliating defeat that sent shockwaves all the way back to Washington. But hidden within the chaos of that defeat, a revolution was beginning. A new and terrifying weapon had been secretly rushed to the front lines, often with minimal training for the soldiers who were supposed to use it. A simple, crude-looking stovepipe that was about to change the rules of tank warfare forever. Back in the United States at Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland, a team of engineers had been working frantically to solve this anti-tank crisis. They knew that if the common infantryman could not be given the power to kill a tank, the war could be lost. The crisis required a revolution in thinking, a weapon that didn't just punch through steel, but that could turn a tank's own armor against it. And they had found it. Private Miller and his friend Leo were not alone in their fear and skepticism. Across the American lines in Tunisia, thousands of young soldiers were being handed this strange new weapon with little more than a prayer and a hastily written manual. To them, it seemed like a suicide mission. They were being asked to stand their ground armed with what looked like a metal tube against a 25-ton steel beast spitting fire. But what these soldiers didn't know was that the bazooka was not just another weapon. It was the product of a revolution in physics, a key that could unlock the secret to killing the invincible Panzer. The problem of the tank was one of simple physics. A tank's armor was a thick, hardened plate of steel, often sloped to deflect incoming projectiles. The only way to defeat it with a conventional weapon was through sheer kinetic energy, by firing a solid, heavy piece of metal at an incredibly high velocity to punch a hole through it. This required a massive cannon, a huge explosive charge, and a weapon system that weighed tons. It was a job for another tank or a dedicated anti-tank gun, not for an infantryman. But the scientists at Aberdeen Proving Ground were working on a different principle. They weren't trying to punch through the armor, they were trying to burn through it, using a principle known as the shaped charge. The concept was as simple as it was ingenious. Instead of a solid block of high explosive, the warhead of a bazooka rocket had a cone-shaped hollow at its front, lined with a thin layer of soft metal, usually copper. When the warhead detonated from the rear, the explosive force was not scattered in all directions. It was focused inward by the cone's shape, collapsing the copper liner upon itself. This process, in a fraction of a microsecond, subjected the copper to such immense pressure and heat that it transformed from a solid into a superplastic, semi-liquid state. This jet of molten metal was then propelled forward at an astonishing speed, over 25,000 feet per second, or nearly 5 miles per second. When this focused jet of plasma-like metal struck a piece of tank armor, it did not rely on kinetic energy like a traditional shell. It behaved like a super-powered blowtorch. The immense pressure and temperature of the jet would instantly melt its way through the hardened steel. The hole it created on the outside was small, often no bigger than a finger. But what came through that hole into the crew compartment was an apocalyptic force, a cone-shaped spray of molten steel from the tank's own armor. Vaporized copper and superheated gas would erupt into the tank's interior at thousands of degrees, shredding anything and anyone in its path. It would instantly ignite fuel lines and detonate ammunition, turning the inside of the tank into a pressurized explosive furnace. To the crew inside, it would seem as if the very air had caught fire. This was the secret of the bazooka. It wasn't just a rocket. It was a delivery system for a focused jet of molten fire, and it was about to be unleashed on an unsuspecting enemy. The challenge for the U.S. Army was how to deliver this revolutionary warhead. In the summer of 1942, a young Army officer, Lieutenant Edward Uhl, working under the direction of Colonel Leslie Skinner, had an idea. He took the existing M10-shaped charge grenade, which was far too heavy to be thrown by hand, and attached it to a small, newly developed rocket motor. For a launcher, they needed something simple. During a test, they found a simple, open-ended steel tube from a scrap pile. The rocket fit perfectly. They added a simple shoulder stock, a handle, and a basic trigger mechanism that used batteries to ignite the rocket. The result was the M1 rocket launcher, a 236-inch, 13-pound weapon that could be carried and operated by a two-man team. When the strange, stovepipe-like weapon was first demonstrated to other officers, its appearance drew laughs. It looked like a comical, homemade musical instrument played by the popular radio comedian of the day, Bob Burns. Burns called his instrument a bazooka. The nickname stuck. The weapon was rushed into production with the highest priority. It was crude, it was inaccurate at long ranges, and its fiery backblast could be extremely dangerous to the operator and anyone standing behind him. But it worked. For the first time in history, the individual infantryman had the power to kill a tank. The bazooka was a top-secret weapon, rushed to the front lines with Operation Torch. The first batches of rockets and launchers were sent with the initial waves of American troops, their instructions for use hastily written and often misunderstood. These inexperienced American soldiers were about to become the first to test this new devil's stovepipe against the veteran Panzers of the Afrika Korps. For men like Private Miller, pinned down in a ditch in Tunisia, the desperate theory was about to become a brutal, battlefield reality. The proving ground for the bazooka would be the rugged, mountainous terrain of Tunisia in early 1943. After their initial landings, American forces pushed eastward, eventually clashing with Rommel's hardened veterans. In a series of sharp, brutal battles around places like Sidi Bouzid and most famously the Kasserine Pass, the inexperienced Americans were savaged. It was a humiliating and bloody introduction to the war. The following is a dramatized account. based on the collective testimonies and after-action reports from these first, chaotic encounters, told from the perspective of an American GI who was about to witness a revolution in warfare. The world was noise and dust. The German machine gun, the buzzsaw we called it, was tearing up the earth around our foxhole, kicking sand into our teeth and eyes. Men from other platoons were falling back, a disorganized retreat. Sergeant Davies was screaming at us, trying to hold the line, but I couldn't hear his words over the roar. Then he was right next to me, his face inches from mine, his eyes wild with desperation. He wasn't yelling at me to fire my rifle. He was pointing at the metal tube, the bazooka, lying in the dirt between me and Leo. He screamed, his voice raw and cracking. "Miller! Get on the damn bazooka now. That Panzer is coming through the gap." I looked over the edge of the foxhole. It was there. A Panzer IV, a gray, smoke-belching monster, had broken through our forward line. It was maybe 200 yards away and closing steadily, its turret traversing, searching for targets. Its machine gun was spitting fire, and its main cannon was turning towards us. This was it. The moment of truth. Leo and I scrambled for the launcher. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely grip the cold metal of the rocket. Leo, a fast-talking kid from Brooklyn who never shut up, was completely silent, his face pale as a ghost under a layer of dirt. He fumbled with the wires, his fingers clumsy with fear as he connected them to the rocket's tail fin. He looked at me and gave a weak, terrified nod. It was ready. I hoisted the bazooka onto my shoulder. It was heavier than it looked, awkward and clumsy. I tried to remember the crude instructions from the crate. Point at enemy. Squeeze trigger. Sergeant Davies was yelling again, his voice a distant sound in the bubble of my own fear. "Lead him! Lead him like you're shooting ducks. For God's sake, Miller, fire!" I put the crude metal sight to my eye. In the small, vibrating square of the sight, the Panzer was a terrifying, all-consuming presence. It filled my entire world. It was getting closer. 150 yards, 100 yards. The ground was shaking with the rhythm of its engine. I could hear the clank of its treads over the gunfire. I took a deep breath, aimed a few feet in front of the moving tank, and squeezed the trigger. What happened next was a complete shock. There wasn't a big bang, not a heavy recoil like a rifle. There was a soft whoosh, a flash of smoke and fire that shot out the back of the tube, kicking up a cloud of dust and exposing our position. A strange streaking light shot out the front. The rocket flew wide, missing the tank by a good 20 feet and exploding harmlessly in the sand. The Panzer didn't even seem to notice. It kept coming, its turret now fully turned towards us. Leo was already shoving another rocket into the back of the tube, his hands working on pure adrenaline. He screamed in my ear, his voice cracking, "Again! Shoot again! He sees us!" I re-shouldered the weapon. My heart was a hammer in my chest. 75 yards, I could see the black cross on its turret, a symbol of death. I could see the glint of the machine gun barrel. There was no time to leave the target now. I aimed again, this time directly at its side, holding my breath, and fired. Another whoosh. This time the rocket flew true. It struck the tank on its side armor with a dull, hollow thump. For a moment, a terrible, agonizing moment, nothing happened. The Panzer continued to roll forward as if untouched. And then, it stopped. A small, almost insignificant wisp of black smoke emerged from a tiny, glowing red hole in its side. A moment later, a violent secondary explosion erupted from within. The turret was blown clean off the chassis, a 20-ton steel mushroom cloud that rose into the desert sky, spinning lazily before crashing back to Earth with a deafening clang. Flames, thick and black, poured from every hatch. The German machine gun fell silent. The other Panzers in the distance, seeing what had happened to their comrade, slowed their advance, suddenly cautious and confused. The battlefield, for a brief, glorious moment, was almost quiet. In our foxhole, we were in a state of shock. We had done it. 2 19-year-old kids, one from Ohio and one from Brooklyn, armed with a piece of plumbing, had killed a monster. Leo started laughing, a wild, hysterical sound of pure relief that turned into a sob. Sergeant Davies was on his radio, his voice no longer a scream of desperation but a shout of raw triumph. "Mustang 6, this is Mustang 2. We have a kill. I repeat, we have a Panzer kill. The new weapon. My God, the new weapon works." I just stared at the burning wreck, the smoke twisting into the blue Tunisian sky. The myth of the Panzer was dead. The kings of the battlefield could be killed, and we, the humble infantrymen, the grunts, we were the ones who now held the power to do it. The experience of Private Miller was not an isolated incident. Across the battlefields of Tunisia, As more American infantry divisions were fed into the fight, the story repeated itself with increasing frequency. The bazooka was more than just a new weapon. It was a psychological atom bomb. It broke the established rules of tank warfare. For years, German tankers had been trained to fear two primary threats: bigger, more powerful enemy tanks, and the screeching dive bombers that fell from the sky. An infantryman, even one armed with an anti-tank rifle, was a nuisance, a pest to be dealt with by the tank's machine guns, not a mortal threat. A tank crew, sealed within their rolling fortress of Krupp steel, felt a sense of invulnerability, a psychological armor that was almost as important as their physical plate. The bazooka shattered that feeling of safety. The threat was no longer a visible, predictable enemy on the horizon. It was now an invisible, almost silent killer that could be hiding behind any rock, in any ditch, in the window of any building. The soft whoosh of its rocket was often the only warning, and by then it was too late. The psychological impact was devastating. German after-action reports from Tunisia, and later from Italy and the Eastern Front, where the bazooka was supplied to the Soviets, are filled with confused and terrified accounts of this new American weapon, which they nicknamed the Offenrohr, or Stovepipe. They described tanks being destroyed with no sound of a heavy cannon, of small, insignificant holes appearing as if by magic in their thickest armor, followed by a catastrophic internal explosion of fire and shrapnel. They could not understand the physics of it. To the average German tanker, whose understanding of warfare was based on the simple, brutal logic of solid steel projectiles, this new weapon seemed like black magic. The morale of some of the most veteran and feared tank crews in the world, men who had faced down entire divisions without flinching, began to crumble. The individual infantryman was no longer a target. He was now a potential tank killer. February 15, 1943, Kasserine. My report on the loss of Kurt's Panzer and the damage to my own was met with cold disbelief. The battle group commander, a major whose face was a mask of aristocratic disdain, looked at me as if I were a madman. "Melted, Oberleutnant?" he had asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You are telling me that two American boys with a metal tube melted an 80mm steel plate?" I tried to explain. I tried to describe the hollow thump, the tiny glowing hole, the horrifying eruption of fire from within. I tried to explain the jet of liquid fire I saw, the impossible heat, the way young Eric simply ceased to exist in a flash of light. The commander cut me off. He said I was suffering from battle fatigue, that my mind was playing tricks on me. The official report lists the cause of Kurt's tank loss as an unidentified explosive device, likely a Teller mine. They do not want to believe it. It is easier to believe in a hidden mine than in a new reality, but the men believe it. The rumors are spreading through the Panzer crews like a plague. We no longer speak of the Americans' cowardice. We speak of their witchcraft. They call it the stovepipe devil. Men are becoming jumpy, firing their machine guns at every shadow. Tank commanders who once rode with their hatches open, confident and commanding, are now sealed inside their turrets, peering nervously through their narrow vision slits. The old arrogance is gone, replaced by a constant gnawing fear. The Americans are still poor soldiers, but they have been given a devil's weapon. The hunt has changed. We are no longer the only predators in this desert. The German High Command, however, was not comprised of superstitious men. They were ruthless pragmatists. When they began capturing examples of this new American weapon, they were not just terrified. They were impressed. They immediately sent captured bazookas and their M6 rockets back to Germany for urgent analysis and reverse engineering. German scientists and engineers, among the best in the world, were stunned by the brutal simplicity and terrifying effectiveness of the shaped charge principle. Working with incredible speed, driven by the desperate need to counter this new threat and turn it to their own advantage, they not only copied the American design, but they improved upon it. They increased the warhead's caliber from the bazooka's 2.36 inches, 60mm, to a massive 3.46 inches, 88mm, the same legendary caliber as their feared anti-tank and anti-aircraft guns. This much larger shaped charge could penetrate even the thickest frontal armor of any Allied tank on the battlefield, including the Soviet T-34 and the American Sherman. The new weapon was designated the German Panzer, but it quickly earned a more famous and terrifying nickname from the soldiers who used it: The Panzer or tank terror. The Panzer was, in essence, a supersized, more powerful bazooka. It was heavier, had a more violent and fiery backblast, and its early operators were often given a large blast shield to protect them from the rocket's exhaust. But it was phenomenally powerful. It became one of the most effective and feared infantry anti-tank weapons of the war. In a strange and brutal twist of battlefield evolution, the weapon the Americans had invented to terrorize German tanks was turned back against them, becoming a source of profound dread for Allied tankers from the beaches of Normandy to the frozen forests of the Ardennes. The birth of the Panzer was the ultimate testament to the bazooka's revolutionary impact. The Germans were so terrified of it, they knew they had to have one of their own, and they had to have it immediately. The story of the bazooka is more than just the story of a weapon. It is the story of a revolution. It was a weapon that democratized anti-tank warfare, giving the humble, often terrified foot soldier the power to stand against the mechanized behemoths of the modern age. It was a weapon that changed the psychological balance of the battlefield forever, replacing the tanker's confidence with a constant, nagging fear and giving the infantryman a newfound and deadly sense of power and revenge. From the deserts of North Africa to the shattered cities of Germany, the simple, crude stovepipe played a crucial and often unsung role in the Allied victory. It was a testament to the power of human ingenuity to solve a deadly problem, and in doing so, it created a whole new world of terror for the men who had once believed they were invincible. Hey guys, thanks for sticking around for the after action. The story of the bazooka is a perfect example of how a single piece of technology can completely change the psychology of warfare. Before the bazooka, infantry versus tank was a mismatch of epic proportions. Afterwards, the playing field was leveled, if not tilted in favor of the man on the ground. What's so fascinating is how the German perspective, their initial shock and terror, is the real story here. From the American side, it was just a new tool to do a job. But from the perspective of a tanker, it was as if the laws of physics had been rewritten overnight. The weapon's effect, the shaped charge, was so alien and so devastatingly effective that it seemed like magic. It's a great reminder that the terror of a new weapon is often as powerful as its physical destructive capability. This story also highlights the rapid, brutal evolution of wartime technology. The Americans invent the bazooka. The Germans are so terrified of it, they capture one, improve it, and create the even more powerful Panzer. The Allies then have to develop new tactics and up-armored tanks to counter the weapon they themselves inspired. It's a vicious, deadly cycle of innovation that defines modern warfare. Thank you again for listening. Your support for the channel is what keeps these explorations going. A huge thank you, as always, to my Patreon and YouTube channel members. May God be with each and every one of you, no matter what you are dealing with, and I will see you in the next episode.